The impact sounded like a car crash. A German Shepherd slammed itself against a steel crate beside the harbor road, each hit echoing across the fog like a warning shot. Officers shouted, one clutching a torn sleeve, already calling for euthanasia. Jace Holloway should have driven past. He'd built his life on never stopping. But the dog suddenly froze, eyes wide, ears pinned, then lifted its head toward the abandoned radar dome on the cliff. Not at the men, not at the crate. At something higher. Jace's pulse stuttered. His old partner looked up that same way, 10 seconds before the blast. So why was this dog doing it now? Wind off the water, pressed against Jace as he stepped out of his truck, the chill slicing through his jacket. The officers didn't notice him. They were too busy arguing, too busy staying out of the dog's reach as the crate rattled on its hinges. Back up, he's gone feral. Doors bending, he'll break through. But Jace wasn't looking at the crate anymore. He was watching the way the shepherd kept glancing upward, breath shaking, pupils blown wide. Not tracking movement. Not searching for an escape. Anticipating. Just like Ranger had when danger wasn't in front of them but above. A low hum rolled through the fog, barely there, drifting down from the old radar dome on the cliff. The dog flinched hard, then pressed itself flat against the back wall of the crate, trembling as if waiting for an impact no one else could feel. Jace took one step closer. Easy boy, what are you seeing? The shepherd's gaze snapped to him, not wild, not angry, recognizing something. And in that split second, Jace realized this wasn't a random outburst. It was a warning. Fog drifted low over the harbor as the officers argued, but Jace didn't hear the rest of their shouting. The German shepherd's stare fixed on that dead radar dome had already pulled him somewhere else. Somewhere hotter, louder, a place he'd spent 10 years teaching himself not to remember. He forced a breath into his lungs, cold, salty, real, the present. But even as he stepped closer to the crate, something tightened in his ribs, the old warning that came any time his world tilted toward danger or memory. He swallowed it down and kept moving. The dog's pupils tracked him, not the officers. Him. For one strange, suspended second, it felt like the shepherd wasn't reacting to a stranger, but recognizing a pattern in him. Something familiar. "Sir, stay back," an officer snapped. "You get close, he'll tear your arm off." Jace didn't answer. The dog wasn't posturing. He wasn't bracing for an attack. He was bracing for something overhead. A sound, a memory, a ghost. And Jace felt the first prick of unease slide up his spine. He stayed there only a moment longer, long enough for the dog to drop its head just an inch and draw one desperate breath. Not a growl, not a threat. More like someone drowning reaching for air that wasn't there. Jace stepped back, unsettled. He didn't intervene. Not yet. Not fully. He simply turned, walked to his truck, and drove off before anyone could ask who he was. But all the way up the winding road to his cliffside cabin, the dog's trembling silhouette stayed with him, burned behind his eyes with the stubborn persistence of an old wound. The cabin sat on the highest point of the western ridge, a weather-beaten shape overlooking the entire harbor. Most people in the town below had seen the place for years, but never seen the man who lived in it. Jace liked it that way. He'd built his world on distance. Distance from noise, distance from people, distance from anything that might pull him back into a story he didn't trust himself to survive twice. Inside the cabin felt like time had stopped somewhere around the day he left the service. Sparse, clean, functional. No frames on the walls, no memorabilia. The only warmth came from a battered wood stove glowing faint orange in the corner. Jace dropped his keys on the table, shrugged off his jacket, and stood facing the panoramic window. The harbor lights shimmered faintly through the fog, blinking like distant signals he didn't want to decode. He should have felt relief. He'd done what he always did, stayed uninvolved, quiet, invisible. But the dog's reaction, the way he looked at that radar dome, it gnawed at him like a loose thread he couldn't stop pulling. A tremor he recognized far too well. He pressed his palms against the windowsill, the wood cool under his hands. Ranger had shown him that posture once. Only once. A violent, fear-charged scan skyward that said everything without a sound. Incoming. Jace shut his eyes. He'd buried that memory so deep it had taken years to stop dreaming in explosions. But tonight it clawed its way back, as if pulled by that dog's gaze. He opened his eyes again and stared down at the harbor. Fog curled in slow spirals over the water. A buoy bell clanged metallically in the distance. The radar dome, black and hollow, sat like a blind eye against the cliff, and somewhere far below he imagined the shepherd still trembling, still bracing for a danger no one else could feel. Jace made dinner without tasting it. A can of soup, 2 crackers, routine, Silence. The life he'd punished himself with because it was easier than trusting himself around others. But even the silence felt wrong tonight. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. He tried distracting himself, checked the stove, wiped the counter, folded the same jacket he wore every day. None of it erased the unease crawling beneath his ribs. When the restlessness became too much, he stepped outside onto the narrow porch. The wind hit him instantly, cold, briny, and sharp. Far below, he could hear faint barking echoing up the ridge. Not random barking. Not angry. Panicked. Jace leaned forward, bracing his elbows against the railing. If he closed his eyes, he could almost hear Ranger there too, pacing at the end of his leash, sensing things Jace never could until it was too late. The memory twisted something inside him, half guilt, half grief, that felt older than his bones. 15 years of isolation had dulled a lot of things, but not that, never that. He exhaled slowly. Fog blew past him like smoke. He should stay out of it. He'd promised himself he would never handle another military-trained shepherd again. He'd sworn he'd never risk repeating the mistake that cost Ranger his life. And yet, why had that dog looked at him that way? Why did he react to the radar dome like it still meant something? Why did Jace's chest feel like someone had reached inside and turned a locked bolt he didn't know had been rusted shut? He pulled the old leather jacket tighter around himself. People always assumed isolation was peaceful. But isolation could be a cage, too quiet, yes, but built from bars no one else could see. And tonight those bars felt thin. Too thin. Jace stared down at the harbor road, barely visible through the fog. A distant shelter light flickered, then another. He told himself it wasn't his problem. He told himself he didn't owe anyone anything. He told himself letting the dog be someone else's responsibility was the safest choice. But the truth was harder. He couldn't unsee that posture. He couldn't unhear that terrified breath. He couldn't forget the look in those eyes, the look of a soldier who knew something was coming. And Jace Holloway had never walked away from a warning. Not really. Even when it destroyed him the last time. Morning crept in slowly, pushing pale light across the cabin floorboards. Jace hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the shepherd flattening against the crate, bracing for an impact only he understood. By dawn, the fog thinned. The world below his cliff settled into its usual rhythm, fishing boats humming awake, gulls circling the pier, the faint clang of metal as the harbor crew unlocked their storage sheds. But the quiet didn't settle inside him. It pressed. Insistent. Like a hand on his shoulder, nudging him toward a place he didn't want to go. He stared at his coffee until it went cold, then grabbed his jacket before he could change his mind. The drive down the ridge took 14 minutes, but each turn tightened something in his chest. He wasn't going to help. Not officially. He told himself he only needed to see the dog again, to be sure the reaction he witnessed wasn't just a trick of fog and memory. That was the lie he used to move his hands. Some lies served a purpose. The shelter sat at the end of a sloped gravel road on the edge of town. A squat concrete building painted a cheerful blue that didn't fool anyone who'd ever lost an animal there. A single pine tree leaned over the entrance as if trying to shield it. Jace parked near the back and killed his engine. The air smelled like wet metal and disinfectant. Inside, a young woman behind the counter glanced up. Brown hair tied back, sleeves rolled, eyes tired but kind. "Morning," she said softly. "Can I help you?" Jace hesitated. Words rarely came easy anymore, but he forced them out. "That shepherd from yesterday. The one in the crate." "Oh." Her expression shifted pity, worry, something heavier. "He's in quarantine. Bad case." Her voice lowered. "He didn't sleep all night." "Neither did I," Jace thought. "Director's in the back if you need him," she offered. He didn't move, didn't speak. He didn't know what he needed. She studied him a moment longer, then nodded toward a hallway. Door with the metal plate. He's probably in there. Jace followed the sound of barking, sharp, frantic, echoing through the corridor like someone beating on a locked door from the inside. Every step made the memory sharper. A heat wave, a rooftop, Ranger's last warning. He swallowed hard. The quarantine wing felt colder than the lobby. Thicker walls, narrower space. Just beyond the reinforced gate, he saw the shepherd in a concrete run, slamming at the chain link again and again, breath coming in ragged bursts. But what froze Jace wasn't the violence. It was the fear behind it. The dog wasn't attacking. He was trying to survive something that wasn't here. A man in a dark green jacket, 50s steady posture, clipped gray hair stood outside the run. The name patch read Ridley, the director. He turned when he heard footsteps. "You again," Ridley said. Not unkindly, not surprised either. Jace nodded. Ridley looked back at the shepherd. "Bad case. Doesn't let us near the gate. Bites the bars until he bleeds. Past owner dumped him and ran contractor outfit. Filed one incident report, then vanished. Jace's jaw tightened. He's scanning. Ridley shot him a look. Scanning Jace stepped closer, eyes locked on the shepherd's posture. He's not reacting to you. Or the room. Watch his ears. He's mapping elevation. Not threat in front, threat above. Ridley frowned. Most dogs look up if they hear something. Not like this, Jace said quietly. This is patterned, conditioned. He didn't mean to say more. But the words kept slipping out, shaped by instinct older than his silence. Ridley studied him carefully now. You've handled dogs before. Jace didn't answer. He didn't want anyone connecting him to anything to anyone. But the shepherd suddenly stopped slamming the gate. He went still trembling, staring straight at Jace with eyes that were too wide, too bright with terror to be mere aggression. Ridley noticed. Huh, that's the first time he's paused for anyone. Jace stepped back, caught off guard. He wasn't ready for that wait to be recognized as something safe. Ridley exhaled. If you know something about what he's doing, I'm listening. Jace stared at the dog. For a moment it wasn't the run he saw, it was smoke debris, a burning rooftop. He forced himself into the present. Voice low. Controlled. He's anticipating overhead impact. Mortars. Rotor wash. Suppression rounds. Something trained. Something repeated. Ridley blinked. You're telling me he's ex-military. I'm telling you he's not dangerous, Jace said. He's terrified. The shepherd let out a thin, quivering whine, one so desperate it scraped something raw inside Jace's chest. He hadn't heard that sound since Ranger. A soldier's panic. Animal or human, it made no difference. Ridley crossed his arms. Even if you're right, panic can still get someone hurt. I don't have staff trained for this level of trauma. Jace said nothing. Ridley looked at him again, slower this time. You don't you silence. The dog pressed himself against the back wall, eyes locked on Jace. Not pleading, not aggressive, waiting. Ridley took a breath. Look, I'm not asking you to step in, but if you know what this is, what he is, I could use the insight. Even 30 seconds of calm would help us figure out next steps. Jace's pulse thudded dull against his neck. He hadn't meant to get involved. He hadn't meant to speak. He hadn't meant to feel anything. But the shepherd's trembling breath hit him like a memory he never escaped. And Jace realized something quietly devastating. He wasn't here by accident. The metal gate shuddered again, but this time the shepherd didn't slam it. He froze, rigid, trembling pupils blown wide, as if some invisible pressure had dropped into the room. Ridley frowned. What's he doing now? Jace knew. He felt it before he understood it. A low vibration rolled through the concrete floor, subtle, distant, the kind of tremor most people wouldn't notice. But Jace's muscles tightened instinctively. It was the sensation that lived in bone, not memory. Up on the cliff, the old radar dome had kicked on, and the shepherd felt it. His tail tucked, his breath hitched. His gaze snapped upward toward the steel support beams above them, locking onto a place where enemies used to hide. Not here, not now, but in his mind, in his training, in whatever hell he'd survived before winding up in this kennel. Jace stepped forward before Ridley could stop him. Don't, Ridley warned, moving to pull him back. He'll bite through the mesh. No, Jace murmured, never taking his eyes off the dog. He won't. The shepherd let out a choking sound, half growl, half cry. His legs trembled, his chest heaved, and he backed into the far corner so hard his shoulders scraped raw against the concrete. He wasn't being aggressive. He was bracing for impact. A familiar ache punched into Jace's ribs. Ranger had done the same thing the night before they lost him. Ridley whispered, "What's happening?" Jace swallowed hard. He thinks something's coming down on him. The radar dome. He can feel that from here. Not the machine, Jace said quietly. The pattern, the frequency, the memory attached to it. The shepherd slammed his eyes shut, let out a breathless whine, then he dropped. Flattened himself to the floor, legs sprawled, ears pinned, chest quivering against the concrete. Ridley's face went pale. That's combat conditioning. Isn't it? Jace didn't answer. Because the shepherd suddenly lifted his head not to look at the door, not at the ceiling, but directly at him. As if he expected Jace to give an order. As if some buried instinct recognized a handler's presence, even in silence. Ridley noticed it too. Why is he staring at you like that? Jace didn't breathe. Because this was the moment he'd feared since the day he walked away from his unit from Ranger, from the life he buried so deep he thought it would never claw back to the surface. But the look in the shepherd's eyes dragged it all into the open. Recognition. Not of him, but of what he used to be. A man who knew how to read fear in a dog's heartbeat. A man who spoke commands without speaking. A man the military would still call handler whether he wanted the title or not. Ridley broke the silence with a hushed, careful question. Jace, What exactly were you before you came here? Jace didn't get the chance to answer, because the shepherd suddenly lunged, not at the gate, but sideways, as if reacting to a threat no one else could see, and the chain-link latch weakened from the day before. Snapped. Metal screamed. Ridley cursed. Jace moved without thinking, but the shepherd was already free, and for one heartbeat, a single suspended second, he didn't run. He didn't attack. He looked straight at Jace, not with violence, with pleading, with warning. Then he bolted. The gate clanged against the wall as the shepherd burst into the hallway, a streak of gray and white fur claws skidding hard across the tiled floor. For a dog moving in pure panic, he was astonishingly fast, cutting sharp angles like someone who'd spent years learning how to move under fire. Ridley shouted behind Jace, "Close the exit, he'll hit the parking lot." But Jace was already sprinting. The hallway lights flickered overhead, a buzzing strobe that made everything feel too loud, too bright, too close. The shepherd flew past the exam rooms, past the supply closet, the sound of his breathing sharp and ragged against the concrete. He wasn't escaping. He was fleeing. And there's a difference. Jace's boots pounded the floor. "Easy, boy, don't." The shepherd clipped a corner too tightly and slammed shoulder first into the drywall, rebounded, but kept going. The blow should have slowed him. It didn't. Fear gave him strength he didn't have. Ridley shouted from behind. He'll go for the main doors, Jace knew. He also knew something else. The dog didn't want open space. Not after the radar dome sound. Not after the tremor. Not after whatever his past had carved into him. He would seek cover, hide, not run. Jace rounded the last bend in time to see the shepherd reach the reception area, an open room with too many windows. The dog skidded to a stop chest, heaving eyes wild as they scanned the ceiling beams, the vents, the shadows. Jace slowed. He raised both hands. Hey, you're okay. Nobody's coming down on you." The shepherd's breath quivered. His legs trembled. Jace recognized the posture instantly. Collapse. Freeze. Stage 3 of trauma response. The dog wasn't planning to attack. He was bracing for whatever he believed would hit him. Ridley whispered from the doorway, "Jace, what do we do? Don't move." Jace murmured, eyes fixed on the shepherd. "And don't talk." The dog lifted his head a fraction, barely an inch, but the movement struck Jace like a punch, because Ranger used to do that too. Before a blast. Before a helicopter shadow passed overhead. Before the sound of a metal hatch opening. It was the look of an animal remembering something he couldn't unlearn. Jace stepped forward slowly. "It's just us, buddy." The shepherd's ears twitched at the voice, not in fear, but in recognition again. Not of Jace, but of the calm, the cadence, the breath pattern of someone who had trained and lived around working dogs long enough to become part of their world. The dog's ribs expanded, then tightened. Jace took another step and the building hummed. A gentle vibration, barely there, but enough. The shepherd snapped out of the freeze and bolted. Not toward the glass door, not toward the street. Down. Toward the maintenance corridor behind the reception desk, a dark, narrow passage leading beneath the building. Ridley swore. The basement tunnel, Jace, that goes straight under the cliff. Jace didn't need the reminder. He'd helped repair that corridor last month. He knew exactly where it led. A steel service door on the far side of the property, just 30 yards from the base of the radar dome. The worst place the dog could go. Yet the place he was certain to run toward, because whatever he feared, it wasn't inside the building. It was above it. Jace sprinted again. He hit the service hallway just as the shepherd's tail disappeared around the bend claws, scraping frantically against the concrete ramp leading downhill. Ridley shouted after him, "Let animal control handle it." No, they'd treat him like a threat, not a survivor. Jace tore down the ramp. His lungs burned. His knees ached. He didn't care. At the bottom, the tunnel widened into a low-ceilinged maintenance room lined with pipes. The air was colder here, damp, metallic, and echoing with harsh, panicked panting. The shepherd stood at the far end of the room, cornered, but ready to sprint through the rusty exit door. His flank rose and fell in sharp bursts. His ears twitched violently with each distant rumble from the radar dome. Jace approached slowly. "Easy, soldier." The dog's startled eyes locking on Jace as though he were the only fixed point in a collapsing world. The storm of fear swirling in the shepherd's eyes flickered, then shifted. Recognition, plea, conflict. Ridley's voice echoed from up the ramp. "Jace, get out of there." But Jace didn't move. He softened his stance, let his arms hang loose, lowered his gaze, not submission, not threat, just presence. "Listen to me," he whispered. "You're not alone down here." The shepherd's breathing slowed just a notch, barely noticeable, but Jace caught it. A signal, a chance, one heartbeat of fragile connection, and then the radar dome thumped again. A deeper pulse, a resonant one. The shepherd's eyes went wide, every muscle firing at once. He lunged for the exit, and Jace made a choice he had spent years avoiding. He followed, into the dark. The maintenance door burst open, throwing a sheet of cold sea air into the tunnel. For a heartbeat, Jace saw two worlds overlap the gray coastline in front of him and a sun-blasted Afghan rooftop from years ago. The shepherd didn't pause. He shot up the rocky incline behind the shelter paws, scraping breath ragged. Jace pushed out after him. Above them, the old radar dome throbbed with that faint mechanical hum, a sound that didn't travel through the air so much as through bone. The dog froze halfway up the slope body, low head tilted skyward, ears vibrating. He wasn't searching for escape. He was tracking the source of the sound, just like Ranger had done before an attack. Jace moved closer, boots sinking into loose gravel. "Easy, boy. I see you." Behind him, Ridley and a young staffer spilled out of the building. "Animal control is on the way," she yelled. Jace stiffened. That meant poles, traps, tranquilizers, panic stacked on panic. "Tell them to stay clear." Ridley shook his head. "We can't. He broke quarantine. County's already calling him a liability." The word liability hung in the cold air like a verdict. Then Ridley added quietly, "And we've got 5 days. That's all the county gave us before they mandate euthanasia." Jace looked back at the shepherd. 5 days. For a dog who couldn't even look at the sky without shaking. The shepherd emitted a thin, high whine. His paws dug into the dirt, bracing. Every time the radar dome's hum wavered, he flinched like something invisible was dropping toward him. Jace lowered his stance, shoulders relaxed, palms down, body turned slightly sideways. A silhouette a working dog understood. "He's not trying to run," Jace murmured. "He's trying to survive something that isn't here anymore." Ridley exhaled. "You're really sure?" Jace didn't answer. His mind was already sliding backward, heat dust. Ranger's stillness, the warning he'd missed, the blast that had torn open more than a wall. He forced himself back. Not now. The shepherd's gaze flicked from the dome to Jace, conflicted, terrified, but focused. That mattered. Ridley, Jace said softly, "Give me 10 minutes alone with him. No shouting, no trucks, no poles. After that, do whatever you need to." Ridley hesitated, jaw tight, but something in Jace's eyes made him nod. 10 minutes. Then protocol starts. The staffer, Lena, sprinted off to stall the incoming animal control truck. Jace took another careful step toward the dog. He could feel the shepherd's heartbeat in the air, fast, panicked, vibrating the ground. "Just you and me now," Jace murmured. He eased himself onto the slope, lowering into a seated position, slow, controlled, unthreatening. His knees cracked, but he held still, letting the mountain hold his weight. This was posture, not dominance, a promise of steadiness. The shepherd's breathing stuttered. His ribs expanded with one shaky inhale, a deeper breath than before. Progress. Small, fragile, but real. The radar dome suddenly cut out. The hum died in an instant. The shepherd flinched once, then sagged to the rocky ground legs folding under him. Head still up, but the violent tension in his muscles eased by a fraction. His eyes found Jace's again, no longer wild, just exhausted. Behind them, the sound of a truck rolled across the gravel lot. Dylan. Animal control. The man who saw incidents, not trauma. Jace didn't look back. He kept his voice low and steady like a thread connecting them. "Eyes on me, soldier. That's it. Stay right there." The shepherd didn't bolt, didn't growl, didn't lash out. He just watched Jace locked on him with a fragile trust. Neither of them fully understood. And in that strange quiet, Jace felt something shift inside him too. If he walked away now, if he let someone else handle this, he would be abandoning another dog under a sky full of echoes. And he knew he couldn't survive doing that twice. Dylan's truck rolled to a stop at the edge of the lot, gravel crunching under the heavy tires. Even from halfway up the slope, Jace could hear the telltale clack of the control pole being lifted off its mount. The shepherd froze. Not in fear of Dylan, he didn't even look his way. His gaze stayed on Jace, pupils wide, like the air between them was the only stable ground left. Jace breathed slow, measured, predictable. "Easy. I'm not going anywhere." Below, Dylan slammed his door and strode forward, boots, heavy jaw clenched. "Ridley, where is he?" Ridley stepped into his path, palms out. "Slow down. We've got it contained." "Contained," Dylan scoffed. "You kidding? He's halfway up a cliff. And that civilian is sitting 6 yards from a level 4 biter." Ridley didn't waver. "He's calming him." Dylan barked a laugh. "He's provoking him. This is textbook escalation." I'm not waiting for him to tear somebody's face off. Jace didn't turn, but his voice cut clean through the air. Dylan, stop climbing. The command in his tone, quiet but shaped deliberate, made Dylan hesitate on pure muscle memory before he caught himself. You don't give orders here, Dylan snapped. No, Jace said. But if you take one more step, he'll break. Dylan lifted the pole anyway. He's already broken. Jace finally looked back. His eyes weren't angry. They were full of something heavier, older. And Dylan, who spent a decade reading animals at their worst, recognized something in that look, something that made him pause. Ridley leaned in quickly. Give him 10 minutes. He's doing what we can't. Dylan stared at Jace another beat, then let out a rough exhale. Fine, 10 minutes. Not a second more. He stepped back, lowering the pole, but not relaxing his grip. Jace turned his attention fully to the shepherd again. You still with me, he murmured. The dog's ears twitched at his voice. His breath shook, but his eyes stayed locked on Jace's face. That was the moment Jace edged closer. Not much, maybe a foot, but the shepherd's body stiffened instantly, muscles coiling like piano wire. He didn't growl, didn't lunge. Just braced the way soldiers brace right before impact. Jace stopped. Okay, that's too close. I hear you. He eased back into his seated position, grounding himself into the slope again, letting the dog choose the distance. High above them, the radar dome sat silent, but its presence pressed down like an old shadow. Even without the hum, the dog kept glancing up, flinching at phantom echoes. That told Jace what he needed to know. It wasn't the sound. It was the memory tied to it. A memory buried so deep it had fused with instinct. He'd seen that before. In Ranger. The flashback hit fast and sharp. Ranger's body pressed tight against his leg, dust swirling around them like smoke. The rising whine, thin metallic from somewhere above. Jace's hesitation. Ranger's certainty. Then, the blast. Jace clenched his jaw, pulling himself back to the present, like dragging himself out of underwater darkness. The shepherd saw the shift in his breath and let out a soft whine, as if he recognized the place Jace had just gone, as if they shared it. Yeah, Jace whispered, voice low. I know that sound too. Down below, Dylan shifted impatiently. Time's ticking, Ridley. This doesn't work, we bring him in hard. Ridley whispered back, give him space. The shepherd's gaze flicked toward Dylan's voice, then snapped back to Jace, almost checking whether the sound was a threat. Jace steadied his breathing. Slower, steadier. The dog copied it again. Another involuntary mirroring of rhythm. Good sign. Jace lowered one hand to the dirt palm flat. Not reaching. Not asking. Just offering presence. The shepherd's nostrils twitched, scenting the air between them. His tail still pressed to his belly, loosened by the smallest fraction, barely a tremor in the fur. Yeah, that's it, Jace murmured. Stay with me. Don't go up there. Stay down here. He tapped the ground once with his fingers. A cue. The shepherd reacted. A tiny shift of weight. His front paw slid half an inch toward Jace before instinct yanked it back. But that half inch meant everything. Behind him, he heard Lena whisper from below Ridley, he's choosing him. Jace kept his eyes soft, his voice even. You're not hearing war, he said quietly. You're hearing memory. But today, I'm right here. He tapped the ground again. Right here, soldier. The shepherd shivered, but his whole body leaned forward this time, just slightly, as if pulled by gravity toward the only steady point he recognized. Jace slowly lifted his other hand just enough to show an open palm. Come down, he said softly. You don't have to stand watch anymore. Wind brushed past the cliff, carrying salt and cold, and something shifted in the dog's posture. The rigid line of his spine loosened. His neck lowered a few degrees. Not submission, not fear, access. Jace exhaled, relieved. Good boy. Then Dylan cursed under his breath. A second truck pulled up. County-level enforcement. 2 more officers stepped out fast, one with gloves, one with a dart gun. Jace didn't turn, but he felt the tension spike like electricity through the air. Ridley swore, No, 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 not now, Dylan yelled. Hold, position, but the officers didn't listen. They started climbing. Jace's heart spiked. If they rushed in, the shepherd would snap. Not out of aggression, but pure terror. And if he snapped now, 5 days wouldn't matter. He'd be gone today. Jace pushed up onto one knee, voice sharp, but soft enough not to startle the dog. Stop, everyone stop moving. The officers froze mid-step. And the shepherd, instead of bolting, took one trembling step down the slope, toward Jace. The shepherd's paw slid another inch down the slope gravel, shifting under his weight. His body stayed rigid, trembling, but he didn't break eye contact with Jace. It was the first voluntary step he'd taken towards someone since he arrived at the shelter. Jace lowered his torso slightly, softening his outline steady as stone beneath the wind. "That's it," he whispered. "Right here, buddy. You're okay?" Behind him, the two county officers were frozen mid-stride, unsure whether to advance or wait. Ridley stood between them and the hill, arms out, whisper shouting, "Do not move. He's coming down. Don't ruin this." Dylan hovered behind an open truck door, knuckles white around the control pole. He wasn't hostile anymore. He was scared, but not of the dog. He was scared of being responsible for the wrong call. Everyone held their breath. The shepherd took another shaking step, then another. His injured paw scraped rock, but he didn't cry out. He was focused entirely on Jace, like Jace had become the only fixed point in a world built out of noise and ghosts. Jace felt a deep ache in his chest. He knew this posture. He'd seen it once before. Ranger bleeding, disoriented, still pushing himself toward Jace after the blast. Not because he trusted the world, but because he trusted him. Memory blurred into present for an instant. Desert heat, concrete dust, the fading thump of artillery in the distance. Ranger limping toward him with the same trembling determination, the same plea in his eyes. Jace blinked hard, forced his breath steady, and anchored himself back in the now. "Come on," he murmured. "I'm not leaving." 8 feet, 6, 4. The shepherd's legs buckled for half a second, but he caught himself panting so hard his ribs looked like they might crack through his skin. Then 3 feet away, he froze again. A gust of wind rolled over the cliff, carrying the faintest metallic click from the radar dome's scaffolding. It wasn't a threat, just old metal shifting in the cold. But the shepherd flinched like he'd been shot. His head whipped upward. His ears flattened. He tensed to bolt sideways back into the maze of rocks. Jace reacted instantly. "Hey, eyes on me." The command wasn't loud, but it was shaped. A handler's call sharp at the start, dropping low at the end. The shepherd jerked his gaze back to Jace's instinct, overriding panic. Jace held that split second. "Good," he whispered. "Stay with me. Stay down here. Not up there." He slid one hand forward on the ground, palm up. The shepherd tracked the movement, not with fear this time, but with deep, desperate concentration, like he was trying to understand the shape of Jace's presence. And then, so slowly, it could have been imagined, the dog lowered his head. Not in submission, in surrender. A quiet, exhausted surrender to trust. Jace felt the air break out of his chest. "That's it." He extended his fingers another inch. "You're doing perfect." The shepherd's breath hitched. Then he stepped the final distance. His head brushed Jace's knee. A fragile, trembling contact. Barely there, but real. Gasps erupted below on the gravel. Ridley whispered, "Oh my God!" Lena covered her mouth, eyes shining. Even Dylan slowly lowered the control pole, staring like he was watching a miracle he didn't know how to process. Jace didn't move a muscle. He let the shepherd's head rest against him, feeling the tremor in every muscle of the dog's body. A cold, shaking pulse. A desperate need to anchor to something steady. "You're okay," Jace murmured. "No one's coming down on you. Just breathe." The dog exhaled a long, trembling breath, the first fully controlled breath since he broke out. And for the first time, his tail loosened from his belly. Not a wag, just uncoiled. Jace closed his eyes. He didn't let himself feel relief. Not yet. Not while the dog was still broken open like this. Instead, he shifted his hand an inch closer, not touching, just offering. The shepherd leaned into it faintly like he needed the pressure to stay upright. Jace whispered, "Good boy. I've got you." A soft clink sounded behind them. The metal dart gun safety. Jace's eyes snapped open. One of the county officers, nervous sweating, had lifted the tranquilizer rifle halfway up his shoulder. Ridley hissed, "Put that down. He's calm. It's protocol," the officer stammered. "If he charges, he's not going to," Ridley shot back. But the movement, the shift of weight behind him, the rising tension, all of it vibrated through the air. The shepherd tensed again. Jace reacted faster than the officers, faster than Dylan, faster than his own doubt. He slid forward, positioning his body between the dog and the rifle in one fluid motion. "Stop." His voice cracked like a whip. Everyone froze, even the dog. Jace didn't break eye contact with the officer. "Lower it." The man hesitated. "This is your last warning," Jace said quietly. "If you take that shot, you'll kill him before the drug does." His heart's firing too fast already. Ridley backed him up immediately. "He's right. He was a handler. Lower it." After a tense beat, the rifle dropped to the officer's side. Jace exhaled through his nose. The shepherd, now pressed against Jace's thigh, hadn't moved. But his trembling worsened. The tension of the humans had reached him. Jace lowered his voice again, focused, grounded. "Not your fault." he whispered to the dog. Eyes back on me. Slowly, painfully, the shepherd lifted his gaze again, right into Jace's. A line seemed to connect them, thin but unbreakable. Wind, metal, voices behind them, it all faded. Just breath, just presence. Just the hollow, aching recognition between two beings carrying the same kind of scars. Jace whispered one final promise, one he shouldn't have made, one he didn't know how to keep, but one that felt truer than anything in years. I won't let them take you. The shepherd stayed pressed against Jace's leg, trembling so hard it traveled up his own bones. Jace kept one hand low and steady, not touching, just close enough for the dog to feel the heat of him. Presence, not pressure. Anchor, not command. Below them, the officers buzzed with restless tension. They didn't trust this stillness, couldn't interpret it. To them, fear looked like unpredictability. To Jace, fear looked like memory. Ridley moved first. He approached slowly, palms out, voice low. Jace, listen. We need to get him contained, safely. Before someone up there decides to override me, he flicked a glance toward the county officers. They weren't talking, but their stance said everything too stiff, too ready, too close to the line where fear becomes action. Jace nodded once subtly. We will. But we do it his way, or we lose him. Ridley hesitated. What does his way mean? It means we don't corner him. Don't reach. Don't look at him like a threat. We walk him down the slope, slow. Let him lean on what he chooses. And you think Ridley said carefully, he chooses you? Jace didn't answer. The shepherd answered for him. The dog shifted just a fraction and curled tighter against Jace's thigh, hiding the side of his body facing the officers. Like their presence burned. A quiet gasp rippled across the staff. Even Dylan muttered, he trusts you. Trust. A word Jace didn't allow himself anymore. Not after Ranger. Not after the moment he failed to believe his partner's alert. But this dog, this trembling creature with a heart pounding like a trapped drum, knew his breath pattern, followed his voice cadence, anchored to his stillness. Jace swallowed the ache rising in his throat. Yeah, he said softly. He does, Ridley inhaled. Okay, then tell me what you need. Jace studied the slope, the angle, the gravel, the dog's injured leg. We walk him down. No sudden moves. Everyone stays behind me. And once you reach the bottom, Jace hesitated, because he didn't know. He only knew the next 10 feet, the next breath, the next beat in the dog's pulse. We'll figure that out. Ridley nodded, stepped back, and barked to the officers. Form a line 20 feet back. No one passes me. Dylan gritted his teeth, but obeyed. The other officers followed, though unease crept through their posture. Jace lowered his voice so only the dog could hear. Okay, soldier, we're moving. He shifted his weight slow and deliberate, making sure the dog saw the movement before feeling it. The shepherd tensed ears, flattening, but didn't bolt. Good. Jace slid his hand a little closer, palm open, an invitation, not coercion. You want to stand, a soft whisper. The dog lifted his head, wobbled, then pushed himself upright on 3 legs. He leaned into Jace instinctively like the ground beneath him had turned unreliable. That's it, good boy. Step by step they descended the slope. Every movement was a negotiation between panic and trust. When a pebble skittered down the hill, the shepherd flinched hard, pressing against Jace's hip. When the wind whistled through the scaffolding above, he ducked instinctively. But he didn't run. He didn't lash out. He walked. Halfway down, the dog paused, chest-heaving eyes darting everywhere at once. Jace stopped with him, grounding the moment. It's okay, he murmured. We're not rushing. Breathe with me. He exaggerated a long inhale, slow, quiet. The shepherd inhaled jaggedly, trying to match the rhythm. Good. Again. Another breath, another tremble, another inch of trust. Behind them, one of the county officers whispered too loudly, "How is he doing that?" The sound snapped through the shepherd like static. He lurched sideways in fear, and Jace caught him with presence alone, shifting just enough for the dog to lean back against him. Ridley snapped quiet. The officer stiffened, chastened, and silence fell again. The final stretch of slope was steep and rocky. Jace crouched slightly, letting the shepherd use his shoulder for balance. The dog's weight pushed into him hard, nearly toppling him, but Jace held steady. Easy. I've got you. Every step, I've got you. And finally, they reached level ground. The shepherd sagged, lowering himself onto his belly the moment his paws touched flat earth. His sides heaved. His claws dug into the dirt as if expecting it to crumble under him. But he didn't go feral. Didn't explode. He just stayed close enough that Jace felt the warmth of his breath on his pant leg. The officers exhaled collectively, some relieved, some irritated, none certain what to do next. Ridley approached slowly. Okay, He's down. Now, what Jace looked toward the shelter building, toward the empty kennel, runs inside, toward the shadows, where the dog had broken his own body trying to escape. He couldn't put him back in one of those concrete boxes. Not after this. Not after the way the dog had chosen him. He needs a quiet space, Jace said. No metal, no echoes, no ceiling beams above him. Ridley frowned. We don't have anything like that. Jace swept his gaze across the property. Then he saw it. A long-forgotten storage shed near the tree line, wooden low-roof old windows, half buried in sand, from years of storms. It wasn't much, but it wasn't a cage. Over there, Jace said. Dylan blinked. That old maintenance shed, it's not reinforced. He'll chew straight through the wall. He won't, Jace said firmly. Not if I'm in there with him. Ridley stared. You're saying you want to stay with him. I'm saying, Jace replied, if you leave him alone right now, we lose everything we gained. Silence fell again. A hard, weighty silence. Dylan finally rubbed his face. This is insane. No, Ridley said quietly. This is the first thing that's made sense all week. He turned to Jace. If you do this, you become responsible for him. Every incident, every breath, every liability on your shoulders. Jace looked down at the shepherd, broken, trembling, leaning into him because the world had given him nothing else to lean on. It wasn't a choice. It was a pull he'd been resisting for years. I'll take responsibility, Jace said. Just give me a chance. Ridley studied him long enough that doubt might have taken root. Then he nodded once. Fine. He's yours for now. The words hit Jace like a blow and a blessing at once. But before he could respond, the shepherd lifted his head and pressed it carefully, gently, into Jace's chest, as if he understood what had just been decided, as if he'd been waiting for it. And somewhere deep inside Jace, in the place where guilt had lived for years, something finally shifted. Not healed, not erased, but moved. Just enough for the next step. Just enough to face what was coming next. The shepherd's head stayed pressed against Jace's chest, the tremors coming slower now, still strong, still jagged, but no longer frantic. Like each quiver was a small piece of fear draining out of him. Wind pushed across the property, carrying the smell of the ocean and damp pine. The officers whispered behind them, waiting for Ridley to change his mind or for the dog to snap. But neither happened. Jace kept one palm hovering near the dog's shoulder, not touching. Just close enough for the shepherd to feel that he wasn't alone. Ridley stepped beside him. Let's move him before the county boys get orders from someone higher up. Jace nodded. Slow. No sudden noise. They started toward the maintenance shed. The shed was smaller up close, wood faded to gray roof sagging slightly from years of storms. But it was quiet. No metal beams overhead, no echoes. No humming machinery to trigger panic. As they approached, the shepherd slowed. His breathing went shallow again, eyes darting as if measuring the threshold of another trap. Jace knelt. Hey, look at me. The shepherd hesitated, then obeyed, inch by inch. That's it. Inside safe. I promise. He angled his body so the dog could walk beside him but not behind him. A deliberate choice. Dogs with trauma needed visibility, not a leader's back disappearing into shadows. Ridley pulled the shed door open slowly, the hinges groaning under years of rust. The shepherd flinched. It's okay, Jace murmured. Old wood. Nothing more. Inside, dust floated in sunbeams, slicing through cracked windows. Tools hung on the wall. A stack of blankets sat in a corner, forgotten but clean enough. Jace stepped in first. The shepherd stopped at the doorway, chest-heaving paws rooted in the dirt. Jace crouched, extended a hand, and whispered permission to enter soldier. A strange thing happened then. The shepherd's ears lifted just a little. Not fear. Recognition. He took 2 steps inside. Ridley exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. Close the door. Not yet, Jace said. Give him space to choose. The shepherd circled, once scanning the walls for exits, threats, shadows. Every instinct in him was trained for survival, not rest. Jace sat down on the floor, back against the wall, legs stretched out, a posture of trust, vulnerability, and a message, you're safe enough that I can let my guard down first. For a long moment, the dog simply stared at him as if trying to understand why a human would ever do that. Then he walked forward, turned, and lay down with a heavy, bone-deep exhale right against Jace's side. A soft sound escaped Lena from the doorway, a choked little gasp she tried to hide. Jace didn't smile. He didn't move. He only said quietly, door. Ridley closed it gently. The shed dimmed, the wind softened, and for the first time since the dog broke free, silence felt like shelter, not danger. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The shepherd slept fitfully at first, paws twitching with old nightmares, then deeper, steadier. His breath matched Jace's. The way Ranger used to sleep when they shared a foxhole under a broken sky. Ridley nudged the door open just enough to slip inside. "We've bought time," he whispered. "But not much. County board is calling in 20 minutes. They'll want a plan." Jace ran a gentle hand down the shepherd's back, this time actually touching him. The dog flinched once, then melted under the warmth. "What did they classify him as originally?" Jace asked. Ridley sighed. "Military-adjacent contractor dog. No clear record. Transported through 3 states in 6 months. That crate yesterday. It came with a single form. No medical file, no behavior notes, no handler listed. Convenient," Jace muttered. Suspicious, Ridley corrected. "Dogs like him don't lose paperwork. Someone made sure he became untraceable." Jace felt a cold shift under his ribs. "Why?" Ridley lowered his voice. "We scanned his microchip. It pinged a defunct network. Something federal 2 or 3 years ago, but wiped." Jace's pulse kicked. A wiped chip. A buried record. A dog trained to react to overhead threats like artillery. Someone had erased his trail. Someone who didn't want him found. Jace stroked the dog's fur slowly. "If they erased him, they'll come looking." "Exactly," Ridley said. "And if they find out the county is holding him, they'll take him," Jace finished. Ridley nodded grimly. "Or destroy him to clean up loose ends." The shed suddenly felt smaller, the air tighter, the stakes sharper. Jace looked down at the shepherd, this frightened, battle-scarred animal whose entire world had been fear until the moment he leaned against his chest. The thought of losing him, of someone taking him or killing him, hit Jace with a force he wasn't prepared for. Ranger had died under his watch. This one wouldn't. "Not again. Not like that," Ridley whispered. "We need a plan before that phone call." Jace rose slowly, careful not to disturb the dog. "We keep him hidden," Jace said. "No records. No photos. No digital trace inside the shelter system." Ridley blinked. "You're asking me to break protocol. I'm asking you to save a life," Jace said quietly. "Because if anyone pulls that chip's data again, he's gone." Ridley swallowed. "And what do we tell the board? That he's unstable, dangerous, unfit for public adoption?" "Jace, they'll put him down based on that alone. Unless," Jace paused, "someone takes him before the decision is made." Ridley stared at him. "You," Jace looked down at the sleeping shepherd. The dog's paw twitched, brushing Jace's boot like he was making sure the world was still there. "I'll take him," Jace said. "Off the books. No adoption file. No paperwork. No trail." Ridley ran a shaky hand through his hair. "This is insane. It's necessary." Ridley stared long and hard at the man in front of him. A man he barely knew. A man who had spent his entire life avoiding responsibility, avoiding connection, avoiding anything that might pull him back into the shadows of his past. Yet here he was willing to break the law for a dog who 24 hours ago hadn't even existed to him. Ridley stepped back and whispered, "I'll cover you for 48 hours. After that, I can't stop the board." Jace nodded. 48 hours. To move the dog. To keep him hidden. To find out why someone had wiped him clean. A ticking clock. The shepherd stirred, lifted his head, and rested it on Jace's thigh, as if sensing the beginning of something dangerous. As if knowing they didn't have time. The cave air felt colder the deeper they went, but Ellis kept moving, one hand brushing the stone, the other gripping the rope tied to Ash's harness. The dog walked ahead with a tense, determined gait limp, still present but drive unbroken. The wind outside howled through fissures overhead, its low moan echoing like distant artillery. It made Ellis's pulse quicken, but Ash didn't falter. He nudged forward, nose sweeping the darkness, as if chasing a memory older and deeper than fear. A distant metallic clatter reverberated through the cavern. Ellis froze. Ash froze too, but not in panic. His ears angled forward, tail-stiff body leaning toward the sound. Not shrinking, not hiding. "Signaling," Ellis whispered. "You've got something, buddy." Ash looked back at him, pupils wide, breath sharp. He wasn't scared, he was warning. Ellis kept low, following the dog's slow advance. Their flashlight beams skimmed across fractured rock until it landed on a collapsed mine corridor. Something glinted behind the fallen beams, metal twisted, shaped by force rather than time. Another metallic noise, a scraping shift, echoed again. Not machinery, not rockfall. Someone was in there. Ellis crouched and pressed his ear to the stone. Beneath the wind, beneath their breaths, he caught it, a faint, intermittent tapping. Hesitant at first, then frantic. A signal, a plea. He whispered, "There's someone trapped." Ash whined softly and pawed the rubble. Ellis's heart thudded. They'd come up the mountain searching for a dog in trauma. They had found something larger. The storm had torn open one of the deeper shafts, and someone must have taken shelter during the chaos. A stranger. In the dark, hours before hypothermia set in, and the clock was ticking. "Okay," Ellis breathed. "This is our fight now." He scanned the collapse. The beams were heavy, too heavy to lift cleanly. The storm had loosened the structure. One wrong move could bury the survivor entirely. Ash stepped onto a narrow opening between two fallen timbers. He placed his weight shifted backed up, then placed it again, testing the stability, mapping it. Ellis understood instantly an old dance between handler and dog. "You're showing me the safe line," he whispered. Ash barked once, short, decisive. Ellis followed the path the dog marked, stepping where Ash stepped, avoiding the points where the structure vibrated. He reached the deepest gap and shined the light inside. A woman lay wedged between rock and timber dust, covering her hair, her breath fogging faintly in the cold. She flinched at the beam. "Hey, hey," Ellis said softly, lowering his voice. "We've got you. You're not alone." Her cracked whisper carried out. "Please, I can't feel my leg." Ellis assessed. Her leg was pinned. If the pressure wasn't relieved, soon she'd lose circulation. The damage could become permanent within the hour. The storm had given them noise, chaos, and fear, but it had also given them this moment. And the mountain wasn't forgiving. Ellis turned to Ash. The dog sat muscles coiled, waiting. "Listen, soldier," Ellis murmured. "I need you calm and steady. You're going to help me shift this beam, only a few inches." Ash crawled forward, lowering his body to fit through the narrow wedge. He pressed his shoulder under the timber, mimicking a trained push, the motion etched into muscle memory from another life. Good boy," Ellis whispered. Together, one veteran, one wounded dog, they pushed. The timber groaned, dust rained down. The woman cried out, but the beam shifted. Just enough. Ellis hooked his belt around her torso and pulled, inch by inch. Ash backed up in sync, dragging with his harness straps. Their breaths filled the cave, one human, one canine laboring against stone. Finally, she slid free onto the dirt. Ellis collapsed to his knees, breathing hard. Ash pressed his head against Ellis's shoulder, trembling with exhausted pride. "We did it," Ellis whispered. "We actually—" A crack split the air overhead. The beam they had moved began to shift back. Ellis grabbed Ash's harness with one hand, and the woman's jacket with the other. "Move," he shouted. They scrambled out just as the collapse slammed shut behind them, sealing the shaft forever. Dust billowed. Ash coughed. Ellis shielded the woman as debris settled, but they were alive, all three of them. It took Ellis nearly an hour to guide her down the mountain. She leaned heavily against him, her injured leg dragging. Ash limped beside them, refusing to be carried, determined to stay alert even through pain. When they finally reached the tree line, the rescue lights were already approaching, Jared leading the deputies, paramedics behind him. The woman was rushed into the ambulance. Jared turned to Ellis, breathless. "You found her." "In this storm, Ellis." How Ellis looked down at Ash, who leaned against his leg tail, giving a low, tired wag. "I didn't," Ellis said quietly. "He did." Ash lifted his head with a soft chuff, as if acknowledging the recognition but not needing it. Jared's voice softened. "You two saved a life today." Ellis didn't answer. He was watching Ash, really watching him. This dog wasn't broken. He wasn't dangerous. He wasn't a burden. He was a soldier rediscovering his purpose. And Ellis felt something in his own chest shift, something long locked away, finally clicking into place. Later, when the ambulance departed and the storm clouds began to break, Ellis knelt beside Ash. He rested his forehead against the dog's. "We're not running anymore. Not from storms, and not from the past." Ash closed his eyes, breathing slow and steady. A new beginning, quiet, fragile, real, settled around them like the first calm after war. And for the first time in years, Ellis whispered the words that once defined him. "Good work, partner." Ash's tail thumped once. A promise. A future. A home. Morning sunlight crept across the foothills, warming the ground still damp from the storm. Ellis stood outside the small cabin where the paramedics had insisted he rest. His bandaged arm hung loosely at his side, and a thin column of steam drifted from the mug of coffee he held. The world finally felt quiet again, the kind of quiet that didn't swallow him whole. Ash limped out from beneath the porch ears, pricking at the sound of Ellis's breath. Despite the soreness in his leg, he moved with a purpose, nose lifted toward the crisp air, as if memorizing every new scent. When he reached Ellis, he leaned gently against the veteran's leg, an earned habit, not a fearful one. Ellis set the coffee aside and knelt in the frost-tipped grass. "You held the line up there," he whispered, brushing a hand over Ash's ruff. "Didn't matter how scared you were, you still moved forward." Ash glanced up, eyes soft, steady, not anxious, not trapped, present. Ellis exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, the air didn't feel too thin to breathe. Paramedics arrived from the trailhead again to check the woman they rescued. When she spotted Ellis, her expression trembled, part gratitude, part disbelief. "You saved my life," she said. Ellis shook his head gently. "He did. I just followed him." Her gaze dropped to Ash. "Then you both saved me." Ash's tail gave a slow, deliberate wag, a soldier's acknowledgement. When the trucks finally rolled away and the wind settled into a soft whisper, Ellis found himself staring at the mountainside. Hours earlier, it had been a battlefield of collapsing stone and choking dust. Now it looked peaceful, like nothing had ever happened. Funny how scars worked that way. Ash nudged his hand again, urging him to walk. They stepped along the tree line together, side by side, the dogs limp in sync with Ellis's stiff stride. Every sound, the crunch of pine needles, the distant call of a raven, the low hum of wind through rock, seemed sharper, clearer, as if the world had been muffled for years and was finally turning the volume back up. Ellis stopped at a ridge overlooking the valley. The shelter sat far below a small shape against the desert floor. He realized something then. He no longer felt the pull to run back to solitude. He didn't want the silence of isolation anymore. He wanted connection, uneven, imperfect, unpredictable, but real. Ash sat beside him, shoulder pressed against his thigh. The gentle weight grounded Ellis in the present, not the past. "There was a time," Ellis murmured, "when I thought the only way to protect the world from my damage was to stay away from it." Ash blinked slowly, listening. "But maybe, just maybe, healing doesn't happen when you hide." His voice cracked, but not from fear, from relief. He looked down at Ash. "Maybe healing happens when you decide someone else's life matters more than your own fear." Ash nudged his hand again firmer, this time almost an answer. Ellis smiled. A real one. By late afternoon, Jared arrived with paperwork tucked under his arm and a cautious smile. "You know," Jared said, glancing between Ellis and Ash, "we could use a field trainer. Someone who understands dogs that don't fit neatly in the world. Someone who knows how to bring them back." Ellis didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at Ash, who held his gaze without uncertainty for the first time since they met. "You think we're ready for that?" Ellis asked softly. Ash's tail thumped twice. Jared laughed. "I'll take that as a yes." Ellis extended his hand not to Jared but to Ash. Then it settled, "Partner. No more running." Ash placed a paw gently in Ellis's palm. A pact. A beginning. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, the valley softened into gold. Ellis and Ash stood silhouetted against the fading light, two shapes forged by storms neither had chosen but somehow survived. And in that quiet moment, Ellis understood something simple and profound. Some wounds don't stay buried because they're unfinished. They stay because they're waiting for someone else to heal beside them. He rested a hand on Ash's head. "We made it out," Ellis whispered. "Both of us." Ash pressed closer, steady and sure. The wind carried the last light of day across the sandstone cliffs, turning them warm and gentle, like a promise that tomorrow would not look like yesterday. And for the first time in a long, long while, Ellis believed it.